Welcome. It's been a long day and it's been a hot day. It's been unusually hot. And that's just carrying on from last year, which I think people are saying is now the hottest year on records. And we were talking about the climate will change as if it's in the future tense. But the truth is, the climate has already changed, right? And that means the conversation has to change as well. Forests have typically been considered frontline climate change warriors. And the sad thing is, at least in India, when you look at how forests are considered, for the most part, in the government, in private sector, and clearing forests, we're still stuck back in the colonial mindset, where 60% of the value of the forest lies in the timber value of the trees, right? And that's a problem because they are undervalued because we don't recognize many of the services that they provide. I don't think capitalism is a four-letter word, as many people do, but it's a messenger. It's not the messenger, right? Capitalism has helped in scaling up things like solar panels and electric mobility. It's helped bring down emissions in some sectors. But if you just look at last year in India, and I'm just going to stick to India for a minute, look at the floods, look at the fumes. There's not one person, one geography in India that is not flooded. Look at this land just sliding off the mountains in Himalayas. Clearly, we need another messenger. We need another philosophy that says man is a part of nature, not apart from nature. And that brings me to faith and to spirituality. And we have two wonderful panelists here. They're both artists, they're both visual artists. So I'm going to hand over the stage to Louise because her art really gets at the heart of why man is a part of nature and why we need to see trees as something very special. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a lot of images to show, and I don't think I'm going to be able to see what I'm showing. Is it possible for me to see what? Okay. All right. As you very clearly pointed out, trees are incredibly important to all of us. The forests are the lungs of our planet. Trees absorb incredibly important and dangerous chemicals from the atmosphere, and they also clean our soils and our water. Trees are incredibly important to our survival. In fact, I devote a whole chapter in my book to why trees are important to us all. Yet deforestation is still occurring across the globe. And so basically it seems that we can't rely on governments alone to make changes, to stop deforestation. Deforestation must be stopped. We need to look to alternative agents of change. What I had tried to do is, as an artist, as a visual artist, I'm interested in the role of perception. And basically, I mean, how we perceive anything in the world contributes to how we respond to it. If we perceive something as separate to ourselves, we're not going to protect it. So perception is incredibly important to cognition. So I wanted to just give you a very short story that will illustrate this. When I was young, very young, I visited a dairy farm with the local farmer, and we were standing in his field, and he pointed to this copse of trees in a paddock that he'd predominantly cleared, so there weren't very many trees left. And he pointed to this copse of trees and said, "I got to get rid of that vermin." And not understanding what he meant, I thought he was talking about field rats. I said, "What do you mean, vermin? Where are the vermin?" And he said, "No, I'm talking about those trees." So this man perceived those trees as vermin and invasive and something that he had to eradicate. Then many years later, I was invited to come to India by my sister, who was actually living here at the time, and she had witnessed an adorned tree in Tamil Nadu, and she said, "Louise, you must come and have a look at this." It's because she realised that after she made inquiries that this is a practice that occurs across the country, and of course I'm sure all of you know this practice, you've seen it many, many times. So I travelled to India, and I must say I became quite obsessed. I was so struck by this practice of adorning and adoring trees. So I ended up travelling across 17 states of India, ultimately, over a 10-year period. So, and of course, in each state, it was different. And travelling across 17 states, I took hundreds of photographs, and I interviewed the local people as to why and what they were doing, and I also interviewed botanists and anthropologists. So this is one example. The first time I actually came across this bunch of trees, I was really struck by its transformation. This is actually near a temple in Palani, a Murugan temple, and it was just off to the side in this bushland. But it really struck me. These trees are, of course, as many would know, is for marriage. So women would go there and actually attach turmeric. So these are smeared with turmeric in the hope and wish for a husband. This is another example of a marriage and a fertility tree. So again, women would go, and around the base of the tree are the talis, which are asking for a husband. And then, of course, the little cloths at the top are asking for a child. And so that the cloths represent cradles. So these became, through the adornment of the tree, they became kalpavrikshas. And then please excuse my pronunciation if I mispronounce some of these wonderful words, but a kalpavriksha is a wish-fulfilling tree, and so this was one of them. This is an example of the talis for marriage, and this is the example of a little cradle that was hung on the tree. Now, in many instances, the trees in India have actually preceded the temples. So in this instance, this is an important temple in Tamil Nadu where the tree actually was there first. And it was considered so important that it became a Sthala Vriksha, which is a sacred temple tree. And again, you had a situation where there would be cradles. But in this instance, because the tree is considered more auspicious, the cradle would be a more permanent structure, a wooden structure with little dolls. So the women would actually come and do this performative action and then hang these cradles. Sometimes, off the Salavriksha, it was actually hung off some metal structures on the side, but it was about the tree. And in other instances, it was hung directly off the tree. And then they would do a performative action where they would circumambulate the tree 3 times and basically apply pigment to the tree themselves and the snake gods. These trees basically broadened my perception of and I tended to feel that basically it broadens the people's perception of the purpose of a tree or the meaning of a tree. It basically contributes to a change of consciousness. So this is another example of a tree in Tamil Nadu which was venerated mostly by women. This is one up in Uttarakhand, and it's for justice. So there were multiple reasons why people would venerate these trees. And then this is a wonderful site, which I only have one photograph here, but I took hundreds of photographs of a sacred site, again in Tamil Nadu. And most of these were not on the side of the road, so I'd have to actually ask lots of questions of people as to find these sites. So basically, by adorning these trees, it would demarcate these trees as special and, create a change of consciousness, which also would enhance the soil around the tree as being hallowed. Sometimes the trees, as I said earlier, actually they come before the temple. So in this instance, this is in Orissa, or Odisha, I should say now, where people would go, and initially there was a tree, and there was a small shop at the side of the road, it was explained to me. People would stop there to purchase something and then make a wish, because the road was very dangerous. And eventually, all the gifts given to the tree acted as solicitation for the local priest to actually build this temple around the tree. But the tree came first. Trees in India are also very important for healing. And so, for example, the neem tree, as many of you would know, is very important in relation to warding off smallpox. And often the branches of the neem tree would be used to protect people. And apparently the actual name for the neem tree in Sanskrit is, I think I wrote as arissa, which actually means the reliever of sickness. They've been able to isolate 135 compounds from the neem tree. So this is an ancient knowledge people have known for a long time of the important medicinal value of the neem tree. There's another a site. This is the same site. So this site was actually in Tamil Nadu, the Puttapalayam temple at Tiruvannamalai, and people would come there if they had measles and they would be asking for a cure from the deity Mariamman. And there's an example of someone with measles. In Kerala, you have the healing site of Parab, the Parab temple. Now, the Parab temple is not actually a temple structure. There's no building as such. It's actually 3 trees, 3 very large trees, one which is devoted to Vishnu, one to Brahma, and one to Mahareshwara. And the people believe that the deity Parabrahman resides in these trees. So very often, particularly amongst Hindu culture and also the Jains and Buddhists, of course, also revere trees. They believe that the deities reside in the tree. So in a sense, the tree becomes like a temple for these people. And some of you may know of the Vishnupad temple in Gaya, where apparently Vishnu blessed Gaya, I should say, as the site where people could have their sins absolved. So people travel to Vishnupad temple a year after the death of their parents. And the final rites of dead are performed again at this tree, the Pinda tree, in Gaya. Whoops, what's happened there? Something's. Can you all see an image? Because I can only. Okay. Now, of course, there are many trees in India that are considered sacred across all of India. For example, the banyan, the pipal, the neem, but then in some districts, the trees are considered sacred because of their utility, because they have an ancient utility. So, for example, in Odisha, the bamboo is considered particularly auspicious, and so this was a bamboo grove that I witnessed. And as you can see, the people would come because they believed the deity. There was an ancient deity here called Ma Kantaposani, who they believed resided in this grove. But of course, this is a grove which has been protected because they believe these deities reside within these trees. Now, that brings me to the sacred groves, which are really the most important, and in fact, that bamboo was a bamboo grove. The sacred groves in India are incredibly important because they're protecting not just individual trees, but whole forests. And this is an ancient tradition that dates back to the pre-agricultural hunter and gatherer period of humanity. And in fact, I should mention that sacred groves aren't particular to India. Sacred groves have existed all over the world prior to the Christianity. Unfortunately, it's Christianity that destroyed the sacred groves of Europe, for example. But there were many sacred groves in Germany. The Celts had sacred groves. All through Europe, there were sacred groves. This is an important one in Kerala, which actually is 64 acres of land. So in that area, basically the trees are considered like the soldiers to the deity. They are protectors of the deity. And so no one is allowed to remove anything from this sacred grove. Everything is protected. Of course, those of you who have visited Tamil Nadu would have witnessed the INR sacred groves. This is a system basically where the sacred groves in Tamil Nadu have been existing since the Dravidian times of India, and where basically the mother goddess was considered to be inhabiting the sacred groves, and the mother goddess would have warriors, one of whom was Ayana, who would always have his horses. So people would come and actually gift these incredibly beautiful sculptures to the deity of these sacred groves, to the mother goddess and to Ayana. And so these are some examples. This is particularly strong in the state of Tamil Nadu. And they are always existing under trees, and the trees are protected. And this is an example of some ancient sites. They don't destroy the actual horses that have been gifted to the deities there. In Himachal Pradesh, it's iron that is considered very, very important. And the deodar tree is considered sacred in Himachal Pradesh. So people would gift iron, anything that's made of iron, to these deodar trees. And so again, these are sacred groves. They're all protected. And they're basically considered giving healing power to men and to cattle. The Basta region in central India, in the Chhattisgarh region, I travelled through there, and of course this is a strong indigenous area of India where all of nature is considered sacred, and so therefore the indigenous people there are very important in terms of protecting these environments. Very often in these sites there wouldn't be as much decoration per se. There might just be a stone, a slab, or you know, something simple, but basically these are considered sacred sites. This is another area in Basta region of Chhattisgarh where, again, these terracotta horses are gifted to the tree gods, and they are believed to protect the tree gods. Oh, so I think I'll just go back to that one. So basically, I mean, that just gives you a small example of, my book is very visual. It's very much recording what I witnessed by travelling through 17 states of India, and you know, then talking to the people about why and how and they were doing this. But importantly, this is over a period of time, over a long period of time, this has affected cultural change, and this is what really struck me as someone coming from Australia. These trees are considered divine, and so therefore they're protected. And when I would ask devotees, well, would it be allowed, for example, if a government official wanted to cut down this tree, they would say, absolutely not, absolutely not. So it really did have an impact on me as an artist and also as an educator, and it finally led to me establishing something in Australia called the Tree Veneration Society. It's not a party, it's actually a society. We're a charity, and our aim is to actually protect the natural environment. We do that actually through exhibitions and workshops and performances, multiple things. But I might stop there because I've talked quite a bit.
No, thank you for that, Louise. And what I loved, and I'm talking for myself, is the tree takes center stage. The tree takes center stage. And I'm going to transition to you, Pradip. We're in the middle of this 6th great extinction. The last time this happened, dinosaurs disappeared. So it's pretty serious. In that context, how important is it to adapt to what already exists? The philosophy of adapting to what already exists, rather than trying to control, take away, reshape.
So I think I'd like to put sacred sites, sacred groves into a little perspective for India. We have, if you look at the history of forestry over the last century and a half, Basically, what happened in India was that around the middle of the 19th century, when the British decided that they wanted to introduce scientific forestry into India because we were losing a lot of forests, the British didn't have any schools of scientific forestry in the UK. The French did, and the Germans did. And you're not going to catch a Brit asking a Frenchman for any help. So they asked the Germans, and the first 5 inspector generals of forestry in India were all Germans, starting with Dietrich Brandis. And the German idea of an ideal forest is an even-aged stand of trees that are cut in rotation, consisting only of those species of trees that are found useful to man. I believe that even today in Germany, German forests contain 97% of the species that you find in 97% of the trees you find in German forests consist of just 7 species of trees, of which 3 are exotic. So that is the German philosophy about forest plantations. And when I was traveling in central India for 3 years for my book on central India, I would have read accounts of some of these forests from the 1870s, 1880s. And when I arrived at these sites, at these forests, I would find that there would be a teak plantation there. There'd all these mixed deciduous forests with an enormous amount of biodiversity would have been replaced by monocultural teak plantations or shishan plantations. So we've actually lost a tremendous amount of our wealth, and it's going on, it's continuing. I mean, nothing to my mind is as absurd as what's happening with the new port that they're developing in the Nicobar Islands. They're cutting down old growth rainforest, and they're doing compensatory afforestation in Haryana, if you please. I mean, nothing to my mind is as completely nonsensical. So when you do have these sacred groves, they're sometimes the only clues we have to the diversity that you had in these original sites, because these haven't been touched in many cases, but not in all cases. So Louise, your documentation of these sacred sites is wonderful. I mean, it really captures something very, very important that's happening at a very informal level, without anybody putting money into it, but just local people with their faith and their beliefs. One of what I call the jewel of the NCR, the National Capital Region in Delhi, is a forest that's been consecrated to the memory of a saint. And that forest has actually been conserved because of the efforts of Gujars, who are pastoralists. And pastoralists are normally known as people who destroy forests and destroy grasslands. But in this case, it really is the power of faith that has saved this incredible forest called Mahagarbani in Delhi. So that's really, I think the sacred forests are really, really important for us today.
So I have 2 questions, and then we can perhaps open it up. First is to you. I'll ask, have we lost something in this modern age? I come from science, but in this modern age of science and economics and capitalism, have we lost something because we've lost spirituality in our lives?
I tend to believe so, especially in terms of environmentalism. I mean, I think that's why I was so struck by this practice in India. It really did strike me as something very special because I saw it as an environmental phenomenon. In Australia, deforestation is still occurring in a shocking way, I tend to feel. And yet, unfortunately, because we don't have the faith, Australia tends to be quite a secular country. People don't necessarily belong to a religion per se. And so therefore, we try to venerate trees, but you'd still get, if the government wanted to widen the road or something like that, they would just come late at night and still cut down the trees. And shocking. Whereas here, it was, many of the devotees I spoke to just said it is taboo. It is taboo to cut this tree or to cut anything in this sacred grove because the deities reside there, and therefore, in some senses, there was fear because, you know, if let's say a contractor went in and cut a tree or a series of trees, then something bad might happen to them, you know, because the deity would get them. So I tend to feel that in this sense, this belief system in the spirituality of the natural environment, of course, has protected the natural environment. As Pradip mentions, sacred groves, they are really important ecological sites where in some instances nothing has been touched in those groves for maybe thousands of years. And so that you're able to go there and witness the original ecology. How many other parts of the world can you actually witness the original ecology of the site? Certainly not in Europe. I don't think there's an original indigenous tree left in Europe. I don't know if that answers your question.
Pradip, coming to you, India has some of the most diverse waterscapes, right? You have Jaisalmer, which gets 165 millimeters of water, and you get Arunachal Pradesh, which gets 5 meters of water. And the local original forest sort of reflected that water and adapted to it and helped downstream communities adapt to it. So coming back to philosophy, was this colonial philosophy, you know, which is continued in some shape or form, the philosophy of centralization? And does water and forests reflect a decentralized approach? Would you like to comment on that?
So, you know, one of the lessons that I've been learning over the last 4 or 5 years and with increasing force recently is that in many, many cases, we tend to want to plant up places as forests where forests are not germane, where forests are not the most appropriate kind of planting to do. You find again and again that grasslands, which in many cases can be even more, there's a much greater amount of carbon burial in certain kinds of grasslands. And for them to be converted into forests or into plantations is the wrong thing to do. And I've been exposed especially in the last 2 years, to scientists who've been doing extensive work with grasslands in India. These grasslands are called ONES, Open Natural Environments. And for example, the whole of the desert, the whole of the Thar Desert, tends to be dismissed as failed forests, as wastelands. It was never meant to be a forest. A forest is not at all germane to the Thar Desert. But the shrublands that you get, the grasses and the shrublands that you get in the Thar, are comparable to some of the richest and some of the most beautiful shrublands that you get in other arid areas of the world. You have the Mulga region in Western Australia, you get the chaparral in California, you get the fynbos in South Africa, and all of these places are conserved carefully, they're visited, they're loved, they're tourist destinations, and we are probably the last people on earth to just continue to dismiss our shrublands as failed forests. So forests are not, I know this talk is all about trees, and I'm saying that in many cases trees are not the most appropriate plants to actually have in our natural environments. But this is, I think, a really important lesson to learn. Every year the Delhi government announces that they're going to plant 2 million trees or 5 million trees, but there's no thinking, there's no thought about which species are they going to plant, are they the most appropriate to the kind of soil and the kind of climate regimes that they're planting in. So we need a really big revamp of how we think of our forests and what the most appropriate forms of our forests are.
Well, I might add, in Australia, because we're very strongly being affected by climate change in Australia, you'll probably have heard we have massive fires followed by incredible floods. It's Floods are occurring right now in Queensland. And so many scientists are saying we have to rethink the type of tree that we plant in certain areas. But I still tend to believe that rather than, planting trees is very important, but wouldn't it be better just not to cut them down in the first place? Because ancient trees, the old growth forests, for example, they sequester a huge amount of carbon from the atmosphere. A huge 22 tons of carbon can be sequestered by an old tree. You plant a small tree, it's going to take a long time to sequester that much carbon from the atmosphere.
Yeah, we'll throw it open for questions, but I just want to make one last point. The story of the tree is a story of carbon, but to my mind, the story of tree is the story of water also, because we've all suffered. I mean, when it's hotter, it just holds more water vapor, so it doesn't rain that often. But when it rains, it pours. And if you don't have the tree with its beautiful roots holding it back and letting it go slowly, we're just going to have more floods and droughts coming our way. So with that, let's throw it up. Yes, I see two questions. I'm not wearing my glasses, so you'll read the gentleman over there, and there's a gentleman in the back. And there are two hands, and there's one lady in the front as well. So,
Firstly, thank you very much. Lovely discussion. Isn't the basic issue that of the operating model? And Louise, you mentioned about this in Christian theology, that Cartesian logic says that a tree is a matter, whereas Indian Indic civilization says the tree is part of a universal Brahma, interconnected network, where you don't feel too separated from it. And therefore, the story of the tree is not just of land and water, but it's also about humanity feeling connected to nature. Do you think that's at the essence of it? And if so, then before we make a change, we have to fundamentally change the operating model.
I think if I've understood your question correctly, as I said at the beginning of my talk, how we perceive anything in the world affects how we respond to it, how we live with it. And so if people in India, whether they're practicing a particular religion or not, feel connected to trees and forests, well, that is very important. That's extremely important. I think the reason why people, let's say in a country like Australia, can easily chop them down is because they don't feel connected. They feel separate. They're just a commodity, easily to be gotten rid of. And this is a problem. We have to reconnect with and recognise our natural environment as something that is part of us.
Hello. Yeah, my question is, ma'am, you were talking about the spirituality connect with the nature. The basic, when the conscious of the human being, is being delusional or is being dilated, basically. So everything is interconnected. Like we say, a common saying is there that there is enough in nature for everyone's need, but not for greed. How do you think that consciousness in human beings or basically in the generation, how that change will come, that we have to take care of things properly?
I think what I'm trying to put forward in my book is that obviously, because the word commodification's in the title, we need to reconsider, recognise how we respond to the natural world. And so I'm very interested in any cultures, and of course the Indigenous people of Australia also have a connection to the natural world, but they're being ignored in Australia. I think one of the wonderful things in India, and I realise, don't get me wrong, I realise deforestation is occurring in India, often illegally, but this tradition of the sacred groves, which dates back, to the beginning of humanity in a sense, has been preserved in a country like India, whereas it hasn't been preserved in other countries. And it really does come from a faith position, but it's become a cultural thing in my mind. I'm not sure if that's answered your question, but we all across the planet need to change how we perceive the natural world so that we protect it, because it's there to protect us.
See, I think the fundamental issue is that our forests are controlled entirely by different state forest departments. And I think that's where we need to bring the most change as rapidly as possible. Government policy has to change, perceptions have to change. I was telling Louise a little earlier about in central India, the Satpura National Park was created in 1981, and we had a new national park director who was trained at the Indira Gandhi Forestry School, and he would have pondered about what trees to plant along that ceremonial avenue leading into the national park. And he planted eucalyptus trees. Now, this is a trained forester who's been through forestry courses, who is planning to use trees in the most biodiverse forest that you get in central India. And he chooses eucalyptus trees. And this just shows you the kind of mindset and the kind of lack of education that prevails even in our forestry schools. So we have a really big task ahead of us to try and re-educate foresters and get them to understand what the real priorities are.
Okay, the lady in the front.
Okay, yeah, hi. Pradeep, I think this was the question I was going to ask you. I'm an environmentalist myself based in Delhi, and I work a lot on plantation as well as air pollution. So I think we have more challenges regarding the mismanagement about, like you just mentioned, the choice of trees. Secondly, replanting them in another place, I think, is truly nonsensical. It doesn't help. Cutting at Sundarnagar and planting in Gurgaon, like we've done recently, doesn't help. So I want to ask you one thing, that how is it, how can we push the plantation of trees to the government policy to understand that air pollution levels are also rising because we are cutting trees all around Delhi NCR in particular. So how do you think, what would be the approach?
See, at the moment, the Forest Department has almost no truck whatsoever with scientists and people who do restoration work. There's a complete gulf between the two. But we formed an alliance called the Ecological Restoration Alliance, ERA, and we're hoping to be able to actually introduce curriculum into the forestry schools where they begin to understand what we regard as some of the fundamental truths about how to actually restore trees and to plant the appropriate tree in the appropriate place.
And what about air pollution? Because I work on air pollution all throughout the year. So tell me something, that why the government and how is it to make them understand that the levels of, the toxicity in the air is also being affected by the chopping down of trees?
Yeah, well, actually air pollution is a very complex matter
Yes,
in Delhi.
Yes.
And throughout that belt, sort of stretching from the Punjab into the Gangetic Plain. Mm-hmm. And I don't think people fully understand why we get this kind of foggy conditions at a particular time of the year. Temperature inversion is clearly one big issue. Vehicular pollution is another big issue. I think scientists haven't quite wrapped their heads around this yet.
Thank you so much.
I just want to respond to the gentleman on the greed versus need. I think it's central to what both of them have talked about, which is if you see non-humans, trees, animals, the ecosystem, as something that is equal to you and has the same respect for their needs as you have for yours, maybe we achieve a better balance.
Yes, I mean, I think there's a lot of scientific work that's been going on now which actually have been able to prove that trees are actually sentient beings. They feel, they communicate with each other, they even protect each other through their roots. There was a wonderful book written by a German forester called The Hidden Life of Trees. But most importantly, I mean, once people understand how much they give us, how important trees are to our survival, I mean, eventually with climate change, humanity, there will be no humanity, but trees will still be there.
Any last words? Okay. So that brings us to the end of our session. The trees can do without us, but I don't think we can do without the trees. So with that, we'll end. Thank you so much.